I want to introduce you to Dr. Claudio Colombo. He's a homeopath doctor. It's not toxicology, it's Hahnemanian homeopathy, and he will explain it to you. He works in a very sophisticated way, in a very precise way, and he is an alchemist doctor that tries to dialogue through homeopathy with his patients, going beyond time. So pay attention. So please be simple, because he will give lots of numbers. Because he will start talking about 7 years, 14 years, and so on. So it's a really, really special and strange presentation. So here is the doctor. Thank you, Lorena. Yeah. By listening the last interventions, I thought that there was some leaking in the intervention, but right now we will need some special seating, a combined treatment with music therapy, together with color therapy, as we listened to yesterday, and epigenetic products with some zeolitic cocktails in order to have some great attention. Till yesterday, I didn't have a clue of what I would speak today, so I just want to project these and just talk about my path, my works. So it's kind of a teaching, and last night I decided to prepare this presentation. I did some kind of a homeopathic dilution of these slides, those that we use during the homeopathy course. I do 4 days of 8 hours each about homeopathy, and other 2 hours about alchemy and physics. These 173 slides are useful for me to try to tell you about my work. So I want to tell you some primary premises. So the telling of an experience. I started studying homeopathy in '87 when I was a student, a medicine student. I met 2 great masters of homeopathy, and then in 1997 I decided to work as a homeopath. So one of them was a meeting for pathology of a relative of mine, and I tried to transfer which kind of scientific treatment we could add to the old treatment. So I tried to use Hahnemann homeopathy, so without using dilutions, the decimal dilutions, but using the last hints that Hahnemann leaves in his 6th edition of the Organon. So he writes 5 times the Organon, so along with his experience, so that his knowledge changes throughout the course of time. But something happens that not many homeopaths have noticed. That is to say, Hahnemann rewrites a 6th edition of this Hahnemann, but it's completely different. It's structured on his 1st edition, but this 6th edition was left to his descendants. His wife couldn't publish it. So homeopathy is structured on the use of the Hahnemannian dilution and decimal dilution only in 1920. Only in the 1920s, the sixth edition could be published. The dilutions are not a 1/100 ratio, but it's 100/50,000 ratio. So we'll see what happened to Hahnemann. I wrote a book about this path dedicated to Paolo Lucarelli, who is my master, my teacher. And he was a great alchemist. And I dedicated this way. The rest is intuitions, then comes contemplations and vision. So I opened the book this way. I open with an article that used to say, empty the mind and open the wind. So in the hermetic theory, it's required the activation, the intelligence of the heart. That this is according to the ancient Egyptians. And also according to the Indians, the Catholic saints, when you see there is somebody without a head, with his head on his hands, this means that to try to look at the several topics with the heart and not the mind. So Buddha says, so this is a symbol of this. So let's try to look at what we will tell, like supporting the hermetic vision. So there are 4 elements: air, fire, earth, and water. And we'll try to identify 2 forces: love, or friendship, or hate and discord. The first one favors the union of the elements, and the second one favors their separation and chaos. So Empedocles is the first one who distinguished the primary elements and the nature forces. So basically, these are the symbols of the 4 elements: air, fire, water, and earth. This is the seal of Solomon, as the symbol that in hermetics relates the accordance of the balance of the elements. So as commenting on a comment on the Philosophorum Turbans, on the comment of Pandolfo, it says at the base of occasions there are the 4 elements that are the most important. In their inner side, there are the 4 elements of nature, that is to say, hot, cold, dry, and wet. So earth is dry and cold, then water, wet, air, then we have hot and fire. So this is the basis of the preparation of the homeopathic treatments. So, and this is also what is expressed in Hermetism. So the dilutions are prepared according to the variations that we will see later on. So we start with water, and then happens what leads to the treatment. So the several phases of the dilutions lead the substance at the level of air. So we won't have water anymore, but air. but it will appear to be water. Many studies have been carried out. I remember once with Professor Betty in 1987, we doubled the speed of weight, and the treatment diluted didn't have any action on the speed of corn, sorry, but the remedy was not was not only diluted but also shaken, and this led to some results that we published through the University of Bologna. Recently, some vials that were shown where 300 hectares of desert were transformed into cultivating lands. So if we give silices to the land, then it becomes a cultivable land. So dilutions that are not diluted but also shaken. So all aspects of nature respond to these frequencies. And my attempt was to see how this happens. In the Tuba Philosophorum, we see how the elements generate the infinitive variety of creatures, and inside of that, the four natures create these structures and harmonies that are incomprehensible and link these elements together. From the immaterial point, we lived to a visible element. And this, at the end, we have the say Pythagorean sequence. The model of reference of Hermetism exists, and I will express it later, but the spirits become things. Through this function of mediation, the remedy transmits to the individual. The remedy stays in the middle, and something that comes back from the medium. So links air, fire, and water that it wouldn't happen in any other way. I will explain this mediation that transmits not to the individual the substance of the healing principle, but only the healing principle contained in the original substance. So what I discovered that the key is to separate the substance. I opened my book. I start my book with some notions of the Hermetic tradition. And Hahnemann, in the last few years, moved to Paris. But he will live in a flat near a doctor. He becomes his pupil. And this doctor, he's an hermetist. He's the father of some famous person, that is to say, Fulcanelli. Today, we don't know who was Fulcanelli, but for those who knew him, he was an illegitimate son of this doctor, and something curious happened.
Hahnemann, as this new philosopher of nature, as student, and Hahnemann is introduced to Hermetism. And in this way, he studies Borrichius with a student to Paracelsus, and he understands a new way to extract the healing principle of a substance. So the 50,000 and the 100th dilution. the tetractys is described in this way. In the Hermetic conception, matter and spirit are different density of the spirit. So there isn't a dual concept of spirit and matter as antagonists, but we have a not dense spirit up and a dense spirit down. Substantially, it's like this. So the Pythagorean scale, according to the Hermetic thought, as the symbols. So from 1 to 2, with the solar and the moon symbol. But it's very important to focus on the central point, that is in alchemy and in hermety. We have sulfurs and nitrogen that are key elements referred to a function. If you talk about Mercury in the Hermetic book, they are talking about something that is not fixed. And salt is the key element between those two forces. One goes up and one goes down. And this is the key element when we are going to talk about the vital force. And you have to focus on the center. I remember about someone who lived in the Arabic world, and it started from a point that is not described here, the not being absolute, that starts to be and to exist. So here we have an absolute that exists as a Lord, as a mediator between the invisible and the visible world, and the absolute also as a subject. So something that goes down, that from a philosophical point of view is like this. This is another image taken from the Museum Hermeticum. After this philosophical theory, we can find the fifth element. If we pick up an Oriental book, we find five elements, because ether is something that is not considered in Hermetism, is something that is invisible. Ether manifests in the fire function and air function and water function, and also in earth function. So we're always talking about something that goes down from the universal to something that exists. You probably have heard by Professor Wolf about Akasha, but I just did a reference to about Akasha. So we have ether, that is Akasha, and manifestation as Deus Varius. But the expert is Lorena, not me. I'm not going to talk about Animan, but he came to this meeting because he was really happy about this key element, but also some problems about the 50,000 dilution that can cause some problems in symptoms of patients. So his research was based on a better medical treatment. So the reasons that in the paragraph we can see that everything he knew was, and he just did jump and he tried to find to find this energy that is so pure, and I believe that I'm so close to Dynamis. And Anemon gives also the instruments, because Anemon was a chemist, but also a doctor, so introducing medicine also the double-blind trial, and we are able to prove medication through this system. And it started from the experimentation. In fact, we call pathogenesis the knowledge of a treatment. And once we try to experiment a new medication or try to verify if it has still the same effects, and we experiment at 30 CH and dilution, and it produces a temporary effect on patients. But we experiment on doctors, and we leave those symptoms that give us a clear explanation of the symptoms and of medications. And I'm going to talk about an example of experimentation. Some years ago, we tried the lava of the Etna, the volcanoes, and we decided to go into groups, a verum group and a placebo group, and no one knew about the real goal of the experimentation. In order to avoid that in the re-experimentation of medications, due to the placebo effect, they relieve those symptoms just because they know about them. And in new experiments, there is this problem. In the placebo group, anything coherent happens. It's a good opportunity to treat them, because they are to treat doctors because they want to feel the symptoms, but otherwise the doctors of a new treatment, they present the symptoms of that kind of disease. And from the physical but also the mental point of view, they lose quantity of experimental, because the physical symptoms are not related to each doctor, but they are but otherwise the mental symptoms are related to each of them. 14% of experiments dreamt about the experimentation, and they dream about volcanoes. And this is a way to get to know a treatment, possible treatment, a new approach, experimental approach. To the low similarity for someone who dreams about volcanoes, and that is redness, we understand that he needs a remedy.
This is the method of preparation by Animan. He is still followed in the preparation of these treatments. So I speak quickly, but the equation is the one you will see on the screen. The first three steps is 1/100, then 1/50,000. So 1/100 is the mother potence. and the 1 LM is represented by a ratio of 1 over 50,000 knots. That is 1 over 50 billion. I studied it, and it's in the organon of animal. So you get to this number, animal. This paragraph says, sorry for the picture, but I went straight to San Francisco for the original papers. This is his writing. Fortunately, it was my wife. We went there together for other reasons, because some friends suggested a vacation there because I was finishing my books. So I wanted to read the original writing, and we couldn't read the book because we got the authorization at the end, and then I could have this opportunity. And once I read this part, it was like a detached paper. I wanted to take it away, but fortunately my wife said no. You don't have to. You don't steal. This is the ratio. When I talk about intuition, vision, contemplation, when I got to writing this part, I had envisioned this quotation. The smallest part of a seed of wheat is the soul. The smallest part of this one is of the Lord is the Lord of the cosmos, and the 50,000 part is the supreme consciousness, and over that there is the absolute. The 1 LMs is next to do the supreme consciousness, and the equivalence is the one that you see on the screen. And then, or beyond that, you'll reach the absolute. This, I think it's curious. And this is in the aphorism of the I Ching that says 30 radius meet in the emptiness of, and the utility is in the will. The material that makes a vase finds its utilities in the vase itself, and the being is the object, and the not being is the utility. That is sums this up. Sums this up. So I observed some winds in the water, in the river that's next to Pavia. When I was little, I spent time in the church of my town. I observed these water winds, and I thought that the water molecules didn't have any choice. They couldn't choose their path, whether left or right. So those molecules that were in the middle of the river had to go towards Pavia, and the other molecules had to go towards Milan. Apart from those who moved in circles and could move. So there is a curious analogy of the observation by Rooney, from which there is the practice of the routine services. And his observation when he was little were about a child on a wheel, and maybe it's a way we develop reality, like the thematic pictures that I used to explain at school. The third pictures that I showed was important, and your water molecule was the Vitruvian Man. So you will see them again with another point of view.
So Hanuman tells about this new way and elaboration, and it extracts something that nowadays can be considered in a scientific point of view. And it's in a sense that it's spiritual, a dynamism. In the treatment of chronic diseases, he starts as in the last 7 years he decided to change his practice, and he would start to use the 50,000 dilution only in the latest year. And we have reached the vital principle, and we will see how in homeopathy this concept meets a practice. The vital principle we can try to find a bridge with Max Planck, who is the father of quantum physics, and with one of his quotation, I dedicated my whole life to rational science. The study of matter, I can tell you about the study of atom. The matter doesn't exist. All matter exists also only because of the force that vibrates the particles. And we can tell that we have the existence of the intelligence spirit. But also a quotation from Claudio Cardella, is a space engineer, and he's worked for 50 years at this University Sapienza of Rome, and he published also a book about water, and his first work on water was made by Claudio Cardella, and he recently published a book with a scientific method, a model that responds to the use of 50,000 dilution. And Claudio Cardella is not well known, and he belongs to ones that were not remembered in the scientific studies. I and Claudio experiment about science and alchemy, laboratory alchemy. How it is taught since everywhere. And we try also to create bridges. One of my friends decided to put us together because I am an homeopath, and also this Claudio is a physics, and he tells the same thing. And another physics under the pseudonym of Captain Nemo talks about hermetism, but it doesn't want to be considered when it talks about this field. And we started to talk about something that has a scientific basis. In homeopath, the principle that or the matter of the body is called vital principle, but it's not to be considered as the vital force. But in the organ of sex, he considered the vital principle as the vital force, but it's not like this. The vital principle that is a knot of the elements, that is the central fire, is the result of two forces. We have the salt, that is the information point that brings us to consider the reality from the point of view of a confinement between the invisible and the visible world. And this confinement point, this limit, is where we get an information. Imagine that from this fire that starts to become hair, it's like we enter water, but we have a limited time to be underwater. But the limitation, a limit of 90 years, 120 years, because we enter with different backgrounds. What we will live in the future, and also the causes that can lower our limits on the water in this sense. And I'm talking about this metaphor in order to present you the key element of this field. This is the simplest element, but it's also very difficult. It's so easy in the entrance of manifestation that can be measured. And in homeopathy, the first argument is that the disease doesn't exist, but ill people exist. It's like saying that we have symptoms and we get sick just because we are sick. And at this point, it's a sort of limit in the homeopathy. In homeopathy, we indicate the three diseases that we recognize. The three miasmas, but I'm going too long, and I'm looking at my wife because she's used to this. And the vital principle is a knot of elements and is the central fire. This remedy that could be seen as a sort of nutrition for that fire. The nutrition is the key principle for the vital principle, and the vital force is the nutrition for the vital principle for the whole body and is individual. And this is a sort of limit in the homeopathy, because sometimes we have fight between people in this field. But Hahnemann considered this point, this element, only in the 6th edition. I need to work on in unique treatment in the 15,000 dilution, and later I'm going to talk about my experiment that had the possibility to explain that patients had to follow just a unique treatment or a different kind of treatments throughout the years. and throughout the years, I mean every 7 years, trying to find another medication and another treatment. The 100th treatment are really low, and they don't work in a vital principle, but in the manifestation. And it's not it's possible that doctors can use different kind of medication at the same time. So, and Kahneman considered this element in the 50,000 delusion.
Vital force needs to be fed. So, and the sustainment is given by the universal spirit. Yeah, but if we go back to the mediation point, we can go to the point of the vital principle, so the main scheme. So the vital force is the mediator between the individual body and the universal body. Here are the paragraphs where he gives this explanation and not utilization of different treatments. Sorry, substances. The disease. If we look at disease with this point of view, we'll see the expression of an unbalancement. This is to say, the disease starting from these prepositions doesn't have chances, because we get ill because we are ill. So we get ill if we lose the balance between inside us. So those who we find in the manifestation in homeopathy, we call them as occasion, possibilities of disease. So let's imagine I myself, I'm a glass, I'm transparent. I don't realize that I'm fragile until I get hit with a rock. Then I will understand whether I'm fragile or whether I am a hard glass, if I'm unbreakable or I'm just cracked. So the cause of that crack, if we look at this phenomenon with this point of view, is not the rock, but the rock is just the chance. So it has its own life, and it gives us some changes. So this is the game that you will see during this presentation. So experiment the remedy of the patient allows to increase the resistance before the glass is stressed by the rock, by the stone. Like a game between two forces, the ill force and the vital force. They are the yin and yang that are explained in the Orient world. If yin and yang are balanced, then we have the expression of this balance. If the ill force starts being dominant, we'll talk about a mistuned vital principle, and it will lead to some phenomena that so I had tried to explain them with these terms, like so impregnation, lesion, deposit, relative incurability, and absolute curability. So let's imagine when we start the manifestation, as the spiritual of manifestation is water. And at the moment of the entrance, when this spirit manifests itself, he already has a color and some news. It will meet when it gets in 3 colors: blue, yellow, and red. According to the dominance of their colors, we'll see a different expression, a different manifestation of a unique and color in accordance to their intensity. In homeopathy, we call them miasmas. They are called psora, psychosis, and syphilis. I will start finding what's the most proper treatment according to the Similium principle. So, if I'm a carbonic choroblastic, like, where am I? The combinations of the colors have names. With the dominance, blue dominance, it's psoric. With a dominance, with yellow and red, is cancerinic. So orange patients will see them, and blue and red is tuberculinic. So the homeopath try to find by phases the treatment, the cause. What's the right purple for that patient? What's the right orange for that patient? So we can find that before we get ill. So if I have some dysfunctional functions because I get ill, then I have some colors. Whether if I'm healthy, I'll have other colors. I just put these because I liked imagining it as a moment with an Ouroboros, linking it with the several philosophies and the modern science. It's a meeting point between philosophies and the sciences. This is a drawing that I made the first time I tried to hold a lecture on the method of the 50,000 dilutions, and this was the premise. I didn't discover the forces, but this is the explanation. So the ill force leads us to downwards, and the vital force leads us to upwards. This system was described by Plato in a poem where he talks about illness as an rotation with 2 directions, one upwards and the other one is downwards. This is an important point because we don't have to imagine the ill force as something bad and vital force as something good. These 2 forces have the same are at the same level of importance. So otherwise, the manifestation wouldn't exist. So Empedocles' hate and the separation of Empedocles is a downfall, and the vital force by Empedocles is something that goes upwards. So we'll not talk about the miasmatic combinations because it's boring. So let's imagine them like this. So try to get what is the right color for each patient. And let's understand whether during his existence when he changed the colors. So we have these pictures that for me were functional to explain some difficult concepts. And we see how the loss of the balance of these two forces defines a disease that at the first phase it has a narrative path and explains the healing laws that leads back to before Christ. So the last symptoms goes from up to down. And the game with the two forces, the balance, the body can lead the force to the peripheral organs. Whereas when we go in the more deep phases, the direction changes. That takes the more important organs, the most important organs. For example, a child that is between yellow and green, blue and green, if he is not able to get back to his balance, because maybe he has a dermatitis, that a skin disease that was suppressed by some treatments that have a centripetal direction instead of a centrifugal direction. And during a long time, it will get worse. It could get worse, get to another more severe disease. In homeopathy, the treatment stays the same. For example, there is this treatment that's between yellow and the center. So this calcium sulformicum, that's the treatment, will lead back to the treatment. So we go back to asthma, then back to dermatitis, and then to healing. So the following phases are lesion. If we see the ratio between the two forces, the dominant forces is the most important one. In most advanced phases, we have a relative incurability. That's a process that doesn't have limits. It's relative because it could be irreversible, because the system stays a circle, but in the absolute incurability, we lose the possibility of going back.
In Animan, when it talks about the use of 50,000 dilution, it recommends not to forget any steps. In my experience, I started to do surgery in 1997, and the patients use 1 LM or 2 LM and 3 LM, and I didn't think that due to my experimentations and my student life, I didn't think that there wasn't a rational teaching about LM. So I decided to use LM as considered by Animan in 1943, and this fact taught me bring me the possibility to focus on a possible scheme about the appearance and disappearance of symptoms that followed a scale that is like the musical one, because the most interesting things would happen around the 3rd year of life, or the 7th year of life, or the 10th year of life. So the future of what happened of what happens give me the possibility to see a possible scheme of what could happen in the future, as in the music scale. So in the first 3 years of the septenary, the heel force is functions very well, and the vital force not so much. But after a few years, and due to the fact that they are lunar years and not solar years, the punctual observation in a laboratory of a result, and the result that doesn't match the expectancies. There is a scheme that is well known in the West world, that is the law of octaves. We have this structure that after do re mi, it follows a scheme if an attack or shock happens. With a neutrality force that can bring a sort of balance. And in this balance, we have everything that we've heard in this period. We feed with food, hair, and everything else. And according to our nutrition, it would be easier to have balance every 7 years. And in this, after these 7 years, if we continue on living perfectly, it's like a passage. So if we haven't a neutrality of time after 7 years, then we'll be a step closer to the disease. And this observation brought me to think that the 50,000 dilution would be located according to periods, and my intuition was that to understand what would happen in the future. So I'm not going to talk about it in details. A step is represented by 1 year, and because of the fact that the healing happens from the center to the periphery, this fact gave me the possibility to see that through treatments, there was a correspondence between the treatment and the year, the age of the patient. Obviously, according to the age, we have two different treatments. And so I imagined that I could use a different system that could speed up the treatment on patient, and that is to skip steps, intermediate steps, and work on the tones and semitones. So 3, 7, 14 LM. And this system caused problems in some patients with heavy problems. They would increase the symptoms. So with studies about rheumatism, I could start following the lunar cycles. So following the system of the moon, so the full moon or the new moon. The septenary is a scale, an opposite and complementary scale of values. So if a child loses the balance in the first year of age, its system will be unbalanced. But if it starts to be balanced, then in 7 years it would be healed. And my way to go on and to proceed, the 50,000 dilution are used according to this scheme, and the results changed. And I underline in those cases, in those difficult cases, there isn't a real scheme, because if a patient with a several weeks or month prognosis, we can try. We will have to find more time to find a treatment. But actually, in one month of full moon, we'll be able to recover a disease of several months.
This happens thanks to photons and cations that you heard of. So the theory that's next to this is the entropy theory. That is to say, putting the vital principle and the individual not under this entropic system anymore that has the ill force in advantage, but putting it under the information of convergent waves that are described that anticipated potential. That is to say, the syntropy. It's travel in time. We can travel in time if we follow this scheme that gets waves from the future, because the vital principle of the patient that expressed by a treatment at a certain point, we'll see that happens to lose information from his past and get information that comes from the future. That is to say, a patient, a 50-year-old patient, that at 57 years old, that at the lunar years has ended its treatment path. His life led his energy to a certain point. As an adventure, because he has 55 years old, his vital principle lost some energy according to the mistuning principle. So if we get his remedy according to the same rotation, so that is to say, the remedies that follow the same path but have an energy that goes backwards, that is to say, on the opposite path. Because the patient was affected by some ill vortexes. So we use with some right-handed spins, vortex with right-handed spins. I personally was quite amazed, because Hahnemann did a step backwards. This dynamic fact that to say reaching this situation of static balance. One day I wanted to go forward, and I met an old man called Hermes. It's a moment where you put your head outside. So you see some visionary thing. Sorry, it's an hermetic situation. So you try to make this jump and see what happens. What happens is that the information gets from the future. What happens is that we go back to the mediation point, to the beginning, to play the game, not in the manifested world, but in that moment where water got its color. So we feel of oxygen what our original oxygen supply. So the hermetist only gets matter to indeterminate perfection to a more than perfect perfection. So this point of more than perfection, there is an inversion of the arrow of time, and we are at a place where, so I go quick. This is Feynman, was already quoted. There is this theoretical possibility was already present when Feynman got his Nobel Prize. Hahnemann wasn't the founder or the father of Hahnemann. Homeopathy leads back many years. In the 17th century, there was a homeopathic text in Venice, and there is a description of homeopathy, which is beautiful, detailed, with some suggestions that goes this way. The fact is to lead an exchange, an information that is that convince the ill force to change way. So this ill force change the functions and becomes vital function. It's like going back when I was listening to Professor Biava, that he talks about these stem cells. It's like going back to the omnipotent spirit, so that is to the point that's not specified yet. So leading the system there, so this ill force changes, and within the patients, things happen that are the things that we want to happen. That is to say, that we go into remission. In some pathological cases, from the clinical point of view, those cases are not possible. That is to say, this is a kind of a particular concept. Let's imagine a case where a patient that had a few months of life, we don't know how many treatments we have to give him. So the possibility to put the treatment beyond him, it has to be quick because he is also 70 years old, and it has a metastasis tumor. The lycopodium that was led to that speed, to that death, takes 7 months. In 7 months, we could reach the patient with this neutrality information. We use the concept of syntropy. Let's find an image for this. Okay. Well, this is the thing that I was talking about before. About the musical scale. The additional shock that according to this system is the remedy that goes like forward, more forward than the patient, so that we reach a condition that's diseaseless.
We won't go in details here. The phases of the recovery is a relativity or absolute incurability that are brought toward matter, because in the sentences we use, we try to give a sort of explanation to what we say. The reactivation phase, a recovery phase, a balance phase, and healing phase, when we are at the end, so at the exchange point. So a perfect healing and a more than perfect healing. When we see the example of a few minutes ago. This 17 are 50 are 10 months because lunar years are related to the 50,000 dilutions. So with a life expectancy of 7 months, from an informational point of view, I think that the expectancy of life is 21 years. It means that we can take this amount of space and we will start with the treatment. In 10 months, we can reach the treatment. And the 7LM is being recognized, so it gives a neutrality information. And every dilution gives more time. And at 74, we are at 7 months, and 84 LM, we have 5 months. We couldn't imagine with this patient that we could access this point because it's color, because it's lipocodium where it comes to my laboratory, but it's in this past is the calcium phosphoricum that is another treatment. I give you the hypocolicum and we reach this result. But in order to give you a sustainment, we have to wait 6 months. And I'm afraid that without the treatment, we cannot reach this point. So this is a patient when first time I had to choose as a doctor what to do in the future to be closer to that date. This was the choice. Is two streets. And all changes are closed. I decided to remove the hypocodium just to find, and it functioned. And we had a problem on May last year, and my idea was to restart the hypocodium, but we will find ourselves with the previous sustain. So on May, with the moon of May, I imagined a problem with this case, and my choice was with from the full moon to the new moon with the calcium phosphoricum, and we found something curious, that is, without the hypocodium, the patient started to have fever without a reason. Then this fever lasted 2 lunar weeks, and this is expression of a work, two forces that are opposite one to the other. And with a weakness point, tries to find change. But this fever, after this fever, it was healed again. It was healthy again. So we expected that it would feel good until the 87 years of age. I'm telling you this because the clinical experience with patients are very important. And another beautiful case it's not beautiful because he has tumor, but because of its responses. And to see how in those limit cases there is an effective verification, the fact that the spirit cannot transform without the effects. Bruno came me at the 89th years old because of a tumor. But the time to do something with a scheme that I talked to you about was not enough, because I would need 1 year, but I had just 7 months with this scheme. So with his son, I just decided with his son, due to the lack of time, to choose with his son. And I say with his son because I'm a doctor who talks to the patient and asks him what what according to them should happen. So the choice at the end was to tell this patient that he had nothing, and I chose the solution with his son. But at the end, everything was okay, and his response was good, and the 87 LM took its time, and it was fine. So we had a attack that told us that he couldn't leave, and another response that told us that everything was fine. One of my friends, I told him that by seeing the reality with this new science and not only the hermetic world, we try to have effect on the reality, but in hermetism we are at place, and we would say that the observator changes the facts. But if we see the attack, we say that Bruno is dead. But if we see Bruno, then we would say that the attack is dead, because Bruno being alive doesn't correspond to the fact that he has a tumor. So my hypothesis is that the treatment and I'm going to skip these slides. We worked on a point that in the hermetic field is represented by a mirror, and as you see, the mirror is a double that we are in the reality, but we are real on one other side. It's like watching us in the mirror, but we are not reflected. We're not seeing us reflected, but is the one on the other side that sees us reflected. And when I saw this picture, I tried to unify those cycles at the Fibonacci spiral. It was another story, so I'm not going to tell you. And this is the image I wanted to show you. The idea was that, unfortunately, due to I work on Macintosh, so there is a problem. We have a double circle. We have the reality and on one side, and the real situation on the other side. So the real, we have the real Bruno who is alive on one side, and this fact, incurability was just considered as absolute, so we didn't understand that it was possible to overcome this limit. The hypothesis is that we have an ultramolecular exchange that is so fast that due to our instruments we cannot measure. And my idea is that by using sound movement, and I think that they bring us to a new order in the water of patient that consists represents 80% of us, and in the entrance point, entering in the water, we are helped by all those things that you heard about microbiotic and epigenetic. They all help us this entrance. But I just concluded. This is the end. By the appearance, these are suggestions, final suggestions. This is the image of your drop. In one of your drops, this is the image, a pentagram by the Vitruvian Man, and your system I've seen your system that I dream during the night after I draw it. Thank you.
C'era anche il grazie.
Forse lo ascoltiamo.
Maybe we will listen to him till midnight, but we are all tired. Come here. He's an enchanter. Can I love your husband professionally? Can I love him? Thank you to everybody. I remind you that if you want some other information, they're waiting for you downstairs. Thank you so much for coming. I want to remind you that you're not the same as you were 2 days ago. Something changed within you. I wish you the best. I will send you some emails whenever we'll do something else, organize something else. Thanks to Dr. Colombo for his presentation. Thank you so much.